Queen Camilla, sentenced to life imprisonment. How did the beloved royal become the mastermind of a multi-million-pound embezzlement scandal? In a shocking turn of events, Queen Camilla has been sentenced to life behind bars after being found guilty of embezzling millions from royal charities. New evidence reveals a tangled web of deceit, offshore accounts, and palace insiders working in the shadows. From trusted royal confidants to international money laundering schemes, this story exposes the dark side of royal charity. Stay with us as we uncover the hidden truth behind the scandal that's shaking the monarchy to its core. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. It was a bright and brisk morning in London when the news broke. A story so shocking that it seemed almost surreal. The once pristine image of Queen Camilla shattered like a fragile porcelain vase hitting a stone floor. The headlines screamed from every tabloid, every news channel, and every social media platform. Queen Camilla sentenced to life imprisonment for embezzling millions from royal charities. For decades, Queen Camilla had been known as a stalwart of the British royal family, charitable, dignified, and loyal. Her dedication to various causes had painted a picture of a benevolent figure, one who stood by King Charles through thick and thin. But now, that very dedication was being scrutinized under a different light, one not of altruism, but of avarice. The public was in disbelief. How could a woman of such high stature and public responsibility betray the very people who adored her? How could someone entrusted with the honor of representing the crown stoop to siphoning millions from charitable causes meant to help the most vulnerable in society? The scandal broke open in the most unexpected way, through a seemingly innocuous financial audit. It started as a routine examination of the accounts of a small royal charity, one that had been funding educational programs in underprivileged communities. The auditors noticed discrepancies, small at first, almost unnoticeable, donations recorded but never received, expenses documented but never incurred. At first, they chalked it up to a simple accounting error, a misplaced decimal or a clerical mistake. But as they dug deeper, they realized the problem was far more sinister and pervasive. The numbers didn't add up, and when they traced the financial trail, they found a labyrinth of transactions leading to offshore accounts that had nothing to do with the charity itself. This wasn't just a clerical mistake. It was a calculated, systematic embezzlement operation. And the more they traced the transactions, the more one name kept popping up: Camilla. Shockwaves rippled through the royal establishment. The discovery seemed almost inconceivable. How could one of the most respected and beloved figures within the royal family be implicated in such a heinous crime? The whispers started almost immediately, palace insiders speculating, the public demanding answers, and the media hounding anyone remotely connected to the scandal. But it wasn't just the auditors who were digging for the truth. A whistleblower from within the palace, someone who had long harbored suspicions but lacked proof, came forward. This individual, who initially remained anonymous, claimed to have seen documents, heard conversations, and witnessed firsthand the manipulation of charity funds. They described how Camilla allegedly coerced loyal aides to sign off on fraudulent transactions, leveraging her status to silence any dissent. As the accusations mounted, the palace issued a statement, one that did little to quell public outrage. The statement acknowledged the ongoing investigation but pleaded for privacy and respect for due process. Yet behind palace walls, a storm was brewing. Camilla remained silent, neither confirming nor denying the allegations. Some speculated that she was in shock, others that she was devising a defense. Meanwhile, the British public, long known for their loyalty to the monarchy, found themselves torn. Some staunchly defended Camilla, refusing to believe the woman who had once been the Duchess of Cornwall, and later Queen Consort, could be capable of such betrayal. Others, however, felt a growing sense of betrayal, their faith in the royal institution shaken to its core. The days that followed were a whirlwind of leaks, speculation, and mounting evidence. Journalists uncovered records suggesting that the funds had been transferred to shell companies registered in exotic tax havens. Some of these companies had been set up years prior, well before Camilla became Queen Consort, hinting at a long-running scheme. Then, the bombshell hit. In a televised press conference, the anonymous whistleblower revealed their identity, a former royal accountant named David Hughes. With a calm and resolute demeanor, he recounted the irregularities he had uncovered and described how he had initially tried to report them through official channels, only to be met with resistance and even thinly veiled threats. Hughes claimed that his conscience could no longer bear the burden, especially as he saw funds intended for cancer research and children's education being funneled into private accounts. Hughes' testimony was damning. He presented spreadsheets, bank statements, and internal emails that painted a damning picture. Camila's alleged involvement wasn't just a fleeting mistake. It was, as Hughes described, a well-organized scheme designed to appear legitimate. The royal family's official response was immediate. They distanced themselves from Camilla, emphasizing that no other members of the royal household were implicated. Public sentiment shifted dramatically. The trust that Camilla had painstakingly built over the years crumbled almost overnight. Petitions surfaced demanding that she be stripped of all royal titles, and protests erupted outside Buckingham Palace, with citizens holding signs that read, "Justice for our charities, and no one is above the law." Within the palace, tension was palpable. King Charles reportedly spent hours in private meetings with his legal advisors. Rumors swirled that he was considering a public address to clarify his position, but no official word came. Camilla, meanwhile, remained secluded, reportedly unable to comprehend how everything had unraveled so quickly. The legal process moved faster than anyone could have predicted. The Crown Prosecution Service assembled a team of top prosecutors, recognizing that the case against Camilla was not just about financial misconduct, but about maintaining the integrity of the monarchy itself. The morning of her arrest was surreal. Photographs captured Camilla being escorted from the palace, head held high, but her expression one of utter disbelief. As she was driven away, the reality of her situation seemed to settle in. For the first time, it wasn't just the public questioning her innocence, it was the law itself. And so, the trial of Queen Camilla began, not just in the courtroom, but in the court of public opinion. Social media buzzed with theories, some claiming that Camilla had been framed, others that she was merely a scapegoat to protect someone higher up. Conspiracy theories intertwined with legitimate legal debates, and the media couldn't get enough. For many, this was not just a trial of one woman, but a test of the royal family's commitment to transparency and justice. The nation watched, waited, and wondered, would Camilla be found guilty of betraying not just the monarchy, but the very people the royal family vowed to serve? The unraveling of Queen Camilla's financial empire began with the smallest of inconsistencies, an unnoticed error that would, in time, bring the grand walls of Buckingham Palace crashing down in scandal. It was a Tuesday morning, one of those gray, misty London days when the chill of the air seeped through even the thickest woolen coats. At the offices of Kensington and Chelsea's Charity Commission, a junior auditor by the name of Emily Graves was combing through routine financial reports for the Royal Children's Fund, a charity under the patronage of Queen Camilla. The Royal Children's Fund had always been a symbol of the monarchy's goodwill, a bridge between the privilege of the royal family and the struggles of the underprivileged. Its mission was to provide educational opportunities and medical assistance to children from disadvantaged backgrounds. Yet as Emily scrolled through the spreadsheets, a peculiar entry caught her attention. A payment of £5 million to a foundation she had never heard of, Hope Springs Foundation. She frowned, her fingers tapping nervously on the edge of her desk. Hope Springs Foundation was listed as an international partner for outreach programs in East Africa, yet the name had never come up in any briefings or reports she had reviewed before. Normally, such partnerships would be highlighted in public relations releases, celebrated as part of the monarchy's commitment to global charity. But there was nothing, no press releases, no public acknowledgments, no mentions in the charity's annual reports. It was as if Hope Springs Foundation didn't exist. Curiosity led Emily to do a quick search on her computer. A frown deepened on her brow as the search returned nothing but a blank slate. No website, no office address, no social media presence. In the digital age, even the smallest charitable organizations left a trace online, yet Hope Springs Foundation was a ghost. Alarmed, she flagged the entry and marked it for further review, her heart pounding slightly as she did. Emily knew the weight of what she had found. Mismanagement of funds in a royal charity wasn't just a clerical error, it was a breach of public trust. Her training told her to follow protocol, so she raised the issue with her supervisor, a seasoned auditor named Charles Morrison. Morrison was a man of few words, known for his strict adherence to procedure and an almost clinical detachment from the high-profile nature of his work. Morrison examined the flagged entry with a grim expression. Hope Springs Foundation. Never heard of it, he murmured, his eyes scanning the spreadsheet. He leaned back in his chair, fingertips pressed together in a thoughtful pose. We'll need to run a deeper audit. If there's an issue, it's better we find it before it finds us. And so, the deeper audit began. Over the next several weeks, a team of accountants and financial investigators dug through years of records, tracing every pound that flowed through the Royal Children's Fund. What they uncovered was staggering. Hope Springs Foundation was just one of many shell charities, fictitious entities designed to siphon funds out of public sight. Payments had been made regularly, sometimes in sums as large as £10 million, to organizations with names like Bright Futures Initiative, Global Unity Fund, and Pathways for Hope. Each was as untraceable as the last. The money trails twisted through international bank accounts in the Cayman Islands, Switzerland, and the Isle of Man. Every transaction was meticulously hidden behind layers of encrypted transfers and offshore accounts, each more obscure than the last. It was a spiderweb of deception, a financial labyrinth designed to confuse and conceal. But it wasn't just the existence of these shell charities that raised red flags. It was the names attached to them. Hidden among the authorized signatories were individuals with direct ties to Queen Camilla. Secretaries, aides, and distant relatives were listed as trustees for the ghost foundations, and their signatures authorized the movement of funds in and out of royal coffers. The investigators were stunned. How had this gone unnoticed for so long? The Royal Children's Fund was audited yearly, and each report had been signed off without question. It became clear that the scheme wasn't just the work of a few corrupt insiders. It was systemic, orchestrated at the highest levels of royal administration. By now, whispers had begun to circulate in the corridors of power. Emily Graves found herself at the center of an inquiry far bigger than she had ever imagined. She was summoned to private meetings, questioned by government officials, and advised, though some might say threatened, to keep her findings confidential. But the genie was out of the bottle, and there was no going back. One evening, as Emily locked up her office, she found an envelope slid under her door. It was unmarked, plain, and unassuming. Inside was a single sheet of paper, typed in plain font. There are more. Follow the money. Look for the Rosewood Initiative. Emily's hands trembled as she read the note. The Rosewood Initiative was yet another name she hadn't come across, but the anonymous message suggested it was just as fraudulent as the others. She didn't sleep that night. Instead, she pored through more records, cross-referencing names, payments, and transactions. Sure enough, the Rosewood Initiative was listed as a recipient of charitable funds, a staggering £20 million over 5 years, supposedly for humanitarian aid in South America. Yet just like the others, it left no trace of its existence. Emily's fingers flew over the keyboard as she delved deeper, finding link after link back to the same network of shell companies. Her eyes burned from the computer screen, but she couldn't stop. What she found next froze her blood. A direct transfer of £5 million from the Rosewood Initiative to an offshore account under the name Camilla R. Windsor. The evidence was damning, almost too blatant to believe. Emily couldn't comprehend it at first. A member of the royal family, diverting charity funds into private accounts? It seemed impossible, yet the data was irrefutable. She double-checked the figures, cross-referenced the accounts, and there it was, clear as day. The next morning, she took her findings to Charles Morrison. He stared at the screen for a long moment, his jaw set, eyes hard. "This goes higher than I ever imagined," he whispered, almost to himself. Then, louder, "We're going to need to go public with this." But going public wasn't that simple. They knew that releasing this information would shake the very core of the British monarchy. It would challenge the integrity of an institution that had stood for centuries, one that was synonymous with honor, tradition, and dignity. Emily and Charles were faced with a choice: bury the evidence, protect their careers and perhaps their lives, or bring the truth to light and risk everything. They chose the latter. The Royal Children's Fund became the first domino to fall in what would soon be the most shocking financial scandal in modern British history. Emily's discovery had opened a door that could not be closed, and behind it lay secrets far darker and more convoluted than anyone had anticipated. And at the center of it all, untouched, unbothered, and seemingly unaware of the chaos unraveling around her, was Queen Camilla, still hosting charity events, still shaking hands and cutting ribbons. But behind her smile was a web of lies, a tangled network of deceit that was about to be brought crashing down. The revelation of the Rosewood Initiative was just the beginning. Forensic accountants were called in, specialists trained to follow the faintest traces of digital footprints, even when hidden behind layers of encryption and offshore masking. Their task was monumental: unravel a financial network that had been buried under decades of secrecy and royal privilege. It started with a long, daunting spreadsheet of every payment made to every charitable organization connected to Queen Camilla. The document stretched back nearly 15 years, detailing millions upon millions of pounds in donations and expenditures. On the surface, it seemed like a testament to royal generosity: food banks, orphanages, medical facilities, educational programs. But beneath the polished exterior, something far darker simmered. The accountants worked in silence, their monitors glowing in the dimly lit room. They cross-referenced every payment with government databases, global financial institutions, and private banking records. What they found was a series of ghost organizations, much like Hope Springs Foundation and the Rosewood Initiative. These entities existed only on paper, shell companies designed to funnel money through a series of untraceable transactions. The funds moved like shadows, slipping from one account to another, often jumping borders faster than regulators could track. From London to the Cayman Islands, from there to Zurich, and then to Singapore, each jump obscuring its origins further. And yet, with enough patience and expertise, the accountants began to see patterns. Some of the funds reappeared under different names: Bright Futures Initiative, Global Unity Fund, Pathways for Hope. These names, much like the others, were tied to non-existent offices and phony directors. What set these apart was their connection to a single central account, one registered in the name of Windsor Holdings Limited, a private trust established in Guernsey. Guernsey, a tiny island in the English Channel, was known for its opaque financial regulations. Corporations there enjoyed privacy laws that made it nearly impossible for foreign governments to access account information. But the investigative team was relentless. They pushed through layers of confidentiality agreements, leveraging international cooperation treaties and forensic subpoenas. It was a breakthrough of monumental proportions. Windsor Holdings Limited was not just a random shell corporation. It was directly linked to Queen Camilla's private financial advisor, a man named Lord Edward Hawthorne. Hawthorne was an enigmatic figure, rarely seen in public and known only to a select few in royal circles. His role as Camilla's financial consultant had always seemed innocuous. A lord managing the personal assets of royalty. But now, it appeared that his duties went far beyond mere bookkeeping. Under his direction, Windsor Holdings Limited had amassed a portfolio of investments stretching across 5 continents. There were stakes in real estate developments in Dubai, shares in American tech firms, and even financial interests in renewable energy projects in Africa. But it wasn't the investments themselves that raised alarms, it was how they were funded. The forensic team traced a staggering £50 million back to Windsor Holdings Limited from various royal charities, all siphoned through shell companies and offshore accounts. Payments were disguised as project expenses, development funds, and international outreach programs, none of which ever saw a single brick laid or a community center built. Hawthorne, it seemed, had been the architect of a complex money laundering scheme designed to bleed charitable donations into personal investments, all under the royal banner of goodwill. It wasn't just a breach of trust, it was grand larceny on a global scale, all masked by the glittering facade of royal benevolence. The forensic accountants compiled their findings into a report, one that ran nearly 200 pages, each one more damning than the last. Transactions were mapped out in meticulous detail, showing exactly how funds moved from public donations into private accounts. There were charts illustrating the flow of money across borders, and annotated spreadsheets highlighting the involvement of prominent figures in Camilla's inner circle. The report was handed to the Crown Prosecution Service, which immediately launched a formal investigation. But before they could proceed with official charges, they needed confirmation of one crucial piece of evidence: Camilla's direct involvement. Up to this point, all the trails led to her trusted advisors and shell companies bearing her charitable signature, but there was no explicit link to her personal authorization. That proof would come from an unexpected source. A disgruntled former employee of Windsor Holdings Limited came forward, an accountant named Gregory Price. Price had worked for the firm for nearly 8 years, managing the day-to-day transactions of its various investments. He claimed that during his tenure, he had personally witnessed documents signed by Queen Camilla herself, authorizing transfers to offshore accounts. At first, his claims were met with skepticism. Royal signatures were tightly controlled, and only a select few had the authority to act on her behalf. But Price had anticipated the doubt. He produced digital copies of email threads, encrypted transaction receipts, and, most damning of all, a ledger entry bearing Camila's handwritten signature. Investigators were stunned. The handwriting matched perfectly with official palace documents. Handwriting experts confirmed the match, and the emails, though encrypted, were traced back to palace IP addresses. It was the final link in a chain of evidence stretching across continents, a chain that led straight to Buckingham Palace. With this revelation, the Crown Prosecution Service moved swiftly. Subpoenas were issued, bank accounts were frozen, and Windsor Holdings Limited was placed under federal investigation. Lord Edward Hawthorne was brought in for questioning, and though he denied any wrongdoing, the evidence against him was overwhelming. His passport was seized, and travel restrictions were imposed as the legal proceedings began. Meanwhile, Camilla remained silent, her public appearances reduced to mere shadows of their former grandeur. Where once she had been photographed smiling alongside school children and charity organizers, now she was conspicuously absent. Rumors swirled that she had been placed under a form of palace house arrest, her movements closely monitored by royal security. The public grew restless. Protests began outside Buckingham Palace, demanding transparency and accountability. Chants of justice for the people and no more royal lies echoed through the streets of London. Politicians weighed in, calling for full disclosure and parliamentary oversight of royal charitable funds. The pressure mounted, and it became clear that the monarchy was facing one of its gravest crises in modern history. The trail of money was undeniable, and its origin was indisputable. Camilla had been caught, not just in a moment of indiscretion, but in a decade-long scheme of embezzlement that had robbed charitable causes of millions. The world watched and waited as the stage was set for what was being called the trial of the century. Royal privilege, once thought to be impenetrable, was now exposed to the light of public scrutiny. And at the center of it all was Queen Camilla, the woman whose public smile masked the secrets of stolen millions. The unraveling of this intricate web of financial deceit marked the beginning of the end for an empire built on trust and goodwill. As the investigation pressed forward, more secrets were bound to surface, each more shocking than the last. And the people, betrayed and outraged, demanded justice, not just for the stolen money, but for the violation of their faith in the crown itself. As the investigation deepened, the focus shifted from just the shell companies and offshore accounts to the very heart of Buckingham Palace. For such a massive operation to succeed, one involving millions of pounds in diverted funds, it required more than just a single mastermind. It needed complicity, coordination, and silence from within. It needed palace insiders. The first cracks in the palace walls appeared with the resignation of a senior aide named Martin Hargrove. For over 2 decades, Hargrove had served as one of Queen Camilla's most trusted advisors, managing her charitable engagements and overseeing financial contributions to various royal foundations. His departure came with little explanation, a simple statement citing personal reasons, but the timing was suspicious. It occurred just days after the forensic accountants delivered their findings to the Crown Prosecution Service. Hargrove's exit sparked whispers among palace staff. It wasn't just the timing, it was the abruptness. Those who knew him described him as a man deeply loyal to the crown, one who would never abandon his post without cause. But there was another side to Hargrove, one that had been quietly concealed behind polished suits and dutiful smiles. Investigators soon discovered that Hargrove wasn't just managing charitable funds, he was orchestrating them. Bank records showed he had been the point of contact for nearly all major transactions connected to Hope Springs Foundation, the Rosewood Initiative, and several other shell organizations. His signature appeared on transfer documents authorizing millions of pounds to move offshore, always under the guise of philanthropic outreach. But Hargrove wasn't alone. The deeper the investigators dug, the more they uncovered a network of palace insiders who had played critical roles in maintaining the facade. Among them was Lady Penelope Fairchild, the head of royal communications. For years, Lady Fairchild had been the voice of the palace, the architect behind press releases that spoke of charitable donations, international outreach, and humanitarian efforts led by Queen Camilla. She crafted the image of benevolence, issuing glowing statements about community impact while millions quietly disappeared from the books. Lady Fairchild's involvement became evident through a series of intercepted communications. Email exchanges between her and Martin Hargrove discussed the allocation of funds in language that was, at best, cryptic, and at worst, incriminating. One such email, dated 2 years prior, read, Ensure the donation to Pathways for Hope is processed by end of quarter. This special project must be secured before the fiscal review. What investigators soon realized was that special projects was coded language for illicit fund transfers. The emails painted a picture of a well-oiled machine, a group of palace insiders moving money with precision and purpose, all while projecting an image of unblemished charity. As the investigation pressed on, more names began to surface. There was Thomas Radcliffe, the royal accountant responsible for auditing annual budgets. His job had been to sign off on the financial statements for the royal charities, ensuring their accuracy and legitimacy. Radcliffe, it seemed, had done more than just look the other way. He had actively manipulated numbers, crafting balance sheets that masked the missing millions. When questioned, Radcliffe initially denied any wrongdoing. He claimed that discrepancies were merely accounting errors, the result of outdated software and poor documentation. But when pressed with evidence of his encrypted communications with Hargrove and Lady Fairchild, his story began to unravel. Confronted with transaction logs and digital footprints, Radcliffe confessed to his role in the scheme, though he insisted he was merely following orders. This confession blew the case wide open. It was no longer just about Queen Camilla and a few shell companies. It was about a palace-wide conspiracy involving multiple layers of bureaucracy. The narrative of a single royal orchestrating financial crimes had evolved into a portrait of collective corruption, a network of insiders all benefiting from the misappropriated funds. But why? What would drive palace aides, long seen as loyal servants to the crown, to betray their oath and participate in such a scheme? The answer, investigators soon learned, was both simple and damning: money and power. Testimonies began to emerge from former palace staffers, individuals who had left their positions under mysterious circumstances or had been forced into early retirement. They spoke of secret bonuses paid out under the table, luxurious gifts presented under the guise of appreciation for service, and even international trips funded entirely by royal charities. One former assistant described lavish weekends in Monaco, paid for through charitable outreach programs that never truly existed. The insiders, it seemed, had been living lives far beyond their modest salaries, propped up by the seemingly endless flow of charity funds. In exchange for their silence and cooperation, they were rewarded handsomely. Their loyalty wasn't to the crown, it was to their own prosperity. Perhaps the most shocking revelation came when investigators obtained encrypted communication logs between Hargrove, Fairchild, and Radcliffe. In these exchanges, they openly discussed managing risks and covering tracks should auditors come sniffing around. The conversations were clinical, devoid of guilt or remorse, just business as usual. One particular email exchange stood out. It was dated just weeks before the scandal broke, a message from Hargrove to Lady Fairchild. The auditors are becoming persistent. We need to shift funds from the primary account. Pathways for Hope is no longer secure. Suggest moving assets to Serenity Trust, less visibility. Serenity Trust was another shell charity, one investigators had yet to discover. This revelation led to a new trail of evidence, one that stretched even further than the initial investigation had anticipated. But the most damning evidence of all came from a whistleblower deep within the Royal Accounting Office, a woman named Sarah Clayton. Clayton had been with the palace's financial department for over a decade. She had witnessed transactions that didn't add up, expense reports that seemed fabricated, and international wire transfers that bypassed standard auditing procedures. For years, she had kept her suspicions to herself, fearing reprisal. But when the scandal broke, she stepped forward, bringing with her a trove of encrypted files she had kept hidden. These files detailed not only the movement of funds, but the planning behind it: schedules for transfers, communications with offshore banking managers, and even lists of palace insiders who had received bonuses for their cooperation. Her testimony was a turning point. With her evidence, the Crown Prosecution Service was able to secure warrants to seize palace financial records, freezing accounts connected to Windsor Holdings Limited and its subsidiaries. The web of palace insiders was larger than anyone had anticipated. Dozens of staff members were implicated, from senior advisors to clerical staff. What began as an investigation into Queen Camilla's financial misconduct had grown into a full-blown palace conspiracy. The public, once reverent and loyal, now watched with shock and disbelief as the names of trusted aides and advisors appeared on news tickers, one after another. The monarchy faced its greatest challenge in decades, not from external forces, but from within its own walls. The whispers of betrayal grew louder, and the nation held its breath, waiting to see who would be held accountable. The hunt for truth had just begun, and it seemed that no one, not even the crown, was above the law. As the investigation dug deeper into the financial underbelly of Buckingham Palace, attention shifted to those closest to Queen Camilla, the ones who stood by her side during public appearances, orchestrated her charity events, and managed her affairs behind the scenes. These were the members of her inner circle, a tight-knit group bound by loyalty, privilege, and secrecy. At the heart of this circle was Lady Margaret Winthrop, Camilla's lifelong confidant and personal advisor. Lady Winthrop had been with Camilla since her early days as Duchess of Cornwall, long before she ascended to the status of Queen Consort. Described by palace insiders as fiercely loyal and unyieldingly protective, Lady Winthrop had always been seen as the gatekeeper to Camilla. If you wanted access to the Queen, you had to go through Margaret. Lady Winthrop handled everything from charity event planning to personal finances. Investigators quickly realized that her influence extended far beyond the ceremonial. It was Lady Winthrop who authorized transfers from the royal charities, disguising them as operational costs and overseas expenses. Her signature appeared on dozens of documents connected to Hope Springs Foundation, the Rosewood Initiative, and even the Serenity Trust, the newly discovered shell organization that forensic accountants were still unearthing. One particular transaction raised immediate red flags. It was a £4 million transfer to an obscure consulting firm registered in the Isle of Man, an island known for its opaque banking regulations. The firm, named Kingsbridge Consultancy, had no public offices, no website, and no registered employees. Yet, according to palace documents, it had been contracted to provide logistical support for Camilla's charity initiatives. Logistical support was a vague term, and the investigators wanted specifics. What they found was a ghost company, a paper entity that existed solely to funnel money. Kingsbridge Consultancy was a financial black hole, absorbing millions in royal donations and spitting them out across dozens of smaller accounts, each harder to trace than the last. And Lady Winthrop wasn't the only member of the inner circle with questionable dealings. There was Sir Geoffrey Harrington, the royal financial consultant who managed investments on behalf of the Queen Consort. Sir Geoffrey was a well-known figure in London's financial district, a man respected for his sharp mind and steady hand in high-stakes investments. But beneath his polished exterior lay a master manipulator of capital. Documents obtained during the investigation revealed that Sir Geoffrey had orchestrated investments in real estate developments across Dubai, luxury resorts in the Caribbean, and even tech startups in Silicon Valley, all funded through charitable donations meant for humanitarian projects. He moved money through international trusts, obscuring its origins and ensuring that any paper trail stopped dead at shell corporations registered in tax havens. Perhaps the most unsettling discovery came when investigators stumbled upon a hidden vault of documents in Sir Geoffrey's London office. It contained handwritten ledgers, encrypted flash drives, and bank statements stretching back over a decade. One of the ledgers, dated 5 years prior, listed payments labeled as royal dividends to multiple individuals tied to the palace, some in cash, others in international wire transfers. What was alarming wasn't just the amounts, millions upon millions transferred in neat, consistent sums, but the names associated with the payments. Alongside Lady Winthrop and Sir Geoffrey were other palace insiders: Lord Samuel Devereux, the head of royal security, Lady Eleanor Blackwell, the director of royal events, and even Dr. Philip Howard, Camilla's personal physician. Dr. Howard's involvement came as a shock to the investigative team. A respected figure in British medicine, he had been Queen Camilla's personal doctor for over a decade, handling everything from routine checkups to private consultations. But evidence suggested that his role extended beyond medicine. He had signed off on medical expenses for charitable medical missions that never took place, expenses that totaled over £2 million. Investigators found no records of medical supplies being purchased, no documentation of personnel being dispatched, and no evidence of clinics being established. It was a front, an elaborate mirage to siphon funds into offshore accounts. Dr. Howard was brought in for questioning, and his testimony was chilling. He admitted to falsifying medical reports at the request of Lady Winthrop, ensuring that charitable expenses looked legitimate on paper while the money flowed elsewhere. In exchange, he received generous payments deposited into a trust fund for his family, all under the guise of consultancy fees. The unearthing of these connections led to a revelation that stunned even the most seasoned investigators. Queen Camilla's inner circle wasn't just complicit. They were the architects of an international money laundering operation that spanned continents. They had used their royal connections as a shield, masking their activities behind the iron gates of Buckingham Palace. Even more disturbing was the level of coordination. Financial records indicated synchronized payments, with each member of the circle receiving their cut within hours of major transactions. It was systematic, organized, and relentless. Lady Winthrop managed the flow of donations, Sir Geoffrey handled the investments, and Dr. Howard created the illusion of humanitarian aid. Together, they formed the pillars of Camilla's financial empire. Yet, despite the mountain of evidence, there was still one crucial link missing: Camilla's direct authorization. So far, the trail had led to her advisors, her aides, and her closest confidants, but not to the Queen herself. The question loomed large: how much did Camilla know? Was she orchestrating the scheme, or merely a figurehead, oblivious to the corruption swirling beneath her feet? To find that answer, investigators focused on communications between Camilla and her inner circle. Thousands of emails were combed through, encrypted files were decrypted, and private phone logs were scrutinized. It was during this sweep that they discovered an email thread dating back 3 years, marked with high-priority tags and encrypted with military-grade security. The thread, titled Project Equinox, detailed plans for a major expansion of charitable investments in Southeast Asia. The emails discussed budget allocations, public relations strategies, and projected timelines for development. But buried within the jargon were subtle references to financial transfers, labeled as infrastructure reinforcements and logistical reinvestments. These were coded terms investigators had seen before, euphemisms for siphoning money into offshore accounts. The final email in the thread was from Camilla's personal account. It was brief, only a single sentence, but it spoke volumes. "Ensure everything is in order. I trust you all implicitly." That line, simple and direct, was enough to shift the narrative. Investigators now had evidence linking Camilla to Project Equinox, and by extension, to the fraudulent transactions that had drained millions from royal charities. Her inner circle, it seemed, hadn't acted alone, they had acted with her blessing. The net was closing. The list of names grew longer, the evidence more damning, and the public more enraged. It was no longer just about misplaced money, it was about betrayal at the highest levels of power. And as the investigation approached its crescendo, the world prepared for a reckoning that would shake the very foundations of the British monarchy. The facade of goodwill and charitable generosity that Queen Camilla had so meticulously crafted began to crumble when investigators turned their attention to the supposed charitable fronts. These were the organizations that had, for years, been heralded as the beacons of royal benevolence, supporting education, fighting hunger, building communities in distant lands. On the surface, these charities appeared to be pillars of altruism. But beneath the polished veneer lay a network of corruption so vast and so deeply rooted that it threatened to dismantle the very fabric of royal philanthropy. The first to be unmasked was Hope Springs Foundation, the organization that had initially raised red flags during Emily Graves' audit. As investigators poured through its financial records, it became painfully clear that Hope Springs was a shell, a mirage designed to absorb donations and funnel them into offshore accounts. The foundation's listed address was traced back to a dilapidated office building in South London. When investigators arrived, they found a single room, empty save for a desk, a chair, and a disconnected landline phone. There were no staff, no community projects, no sign of charitable work whatsoever. Neighbors in the area claimed they had never seen anyone enter or leave the premises. A local shopkeeper, who had run his business next door for nearly a decade, swore the office had been vacant for as long as he could remember. Hope Springs Foundation, it seemed, existed only on paper. The investigation revealed that over the past 7 years, the foundation had received more than £25 million in donations, a staggering sum that was meant to fund orphanages in Kenya, water purification projects in Ghana, and food banks in Somalia. None of these projects had materialized. Bank records showed the money had been transferred almost immediately upon receipt, wired through a series of international accounts before disappearing into the financial underworld. But Hope Springs was just the beginning. Next came Pathways for Hope, another charity championed by Queen Camilla during her public appearances. Described as an initiative to empower women in rural India through microloans and vocational training, it was a frequent highlight of her speeches. She spoke passionately of the women she had met, of their resilience and their dreams. Photos of her visits to remote villages adorned the walls of Buckingham Palace's media center. Yet, when investigators reached out to the Indian government for records of Pathways for Hope's involvement in the country, they were met with confusion. There were no records of community centers built, no microloans distributed, no vocational programs initiated. The charity, much like Hope Springs, was a ghost. Further investigation uncovered that Pathways for Hope was registered to a private law firm in Luxembourg, a country known for its banking secrecy and financial opacity. The listed directors were fictional, names pulled from public records and forged onto legal documents. Bank transfers showed that within days of receiving donations, the money was wired to accounts in Singapore, then to the Isle of Man, and finally to a private equity fund registered under the name Windsor Holdings Limited. Windsor Holdings Limited had already been flagged during earlier stages of the investigation, linked to Queen Camilla's financial advisor, Lord Edward Hawthorne. It became clear that Pathways for Hope had been a front, a false banner waved in the name of charity to funnel millions into royal investments overseas. The same pattern emerged with Global Unity Fund, an organization ostensibly created to build sustainable housing for displaced families in South America. Promotional videos showed modest homes being constructed in impoverished regions, complete with footage of grateful families and ribbon-cutting ceremonies. But when investigators tried to track down the projects, they found empty plots of land, untouched and overgrown with weeds. The families interviewed in the promotional videos? Actors hired through an agency based in London. The footage of construction? Filmed on a single-day shoot in a controlled environment designed to mimic rural South America. Every detail, every smiling face, every handshaking photo op had been staged. Global Unity Fund had collected nearly £30 million in donations since its inception. That money, too, was siphoned away through offshore accounts, masked by corporate fronts and shell corporations. Investigators discovered a web of financial conduits stretching from Hong Kong to the Cayman Islands, each more obscure than the last. By now, the public was seething. The revelations were being reported in real time, with each new discovery broadcasted on every major news outlet. Crowds gathered outside Buckingham Palace, their banners waving accusations of betrayal and theft. "Give back our money," and "royal robbery," were shouted through megaphones as the palace guards watched silently from behind iron gates. Parliament was forced to act. Questions were raised in the House of Commons, demanding full transparency from the royal family and a comprehensive audit of all charitable donations tied to Queen Camilla's patronage. Politicians who had once stood proudly beside her during fundraising events now distanced themselves, issuing carefully worded statements of shock and disappointment. It was during this storm of public outrage that a breakthrough occurred. A whistleblower emerged, a former administrator for Global Unity Fund named Peter Collins. Collins had been with the organization since its founding, handling documentation and processing charitable donations. For years, he had watched the money come and go, directed by figures whose names he was told never to question. But the deeper he delved into the accounts, the more discrepancies he found. Collins claimed that he had raised concerns with Lady Margaret Winthrop, only to be met with thinly veiled threats and reassurances that everything was above board. When Collins persisted, his access to financial records was revoked, and he was subsequently dismissed for breach of confidentiality. Angered and disillusioned, Collins began gathering evidence in secret, copies of bank transfers, ledgers, email exchanges, and confidential memos. He reached out to investigators and handed over everything he had collected. His testimony was explosive. He described how Lady Winthrop and Sir Geoffrey Harrington would send directives, instructing him to mark certain transactions as developmental costs and humanitarian outreach. In reality, these payments were routed directly to offshore accounts controlled by Windsor Holdings Limited. Collins' evidence not only confirmed the fraudulent nature of the charities but also provided investigators with a roadmap, a step-by-step guide to how the money was laundered, hidden, and reintroduced into royal investments. His bravery set off a cascade of resignations from Global Unity Fund's board of directors, each member now facing criminal charges of fraud and money laundering. The unmasking of these charitable fronts stripped away the final layer of illusion surrounding Queen Camilla's philanthropic image. For years, she had stood at podiums and ribbon cuttings, heralding the importance of charity and compassion. Yet behind the camera flashes and royal smiles lay an empire built on deceit, a network of false hope and stolen dreams. The public's faith was shattered. Donations plummeted, trust evaporated, and the charities themselves disbanded one by one. The monarchy, once a symbol of stability and tradition, now found itself mired in scandal. The question of Camilla's direct involvement lingered like a specter over Buckingham Palace, whispering of corruption, betrayal, and the misuse of power. But there were still more secrets to unearth, more names to be revealed, and more truths to be dragged into the light. And as the investigators pressed forward, the realization set in: this was far from over. The public had long believed that royal charities were untouchable, beacons of hope that stretched across continents, bringing aid to the underprivileged and providing opportunities for the less fortunate. Yet, as investigators peeled back the layers of deceit, it became apparent that the rod of corruption stretched far beyond charitable fronts and shell companies. It led straight back to the heart of the monarchy itself. For decades, the British royal family had been seen as the moral compass of the nation. Their involvement in charity work, particularly through the various foundations championed by Queen Camilla, had cemented their image as benevolent leaders who cared deeply for their subjects. Every televised ribbon-cutting, every carefully staged photo with children in need, had been part of a carefully constructed facade. The unraveling began with the discovery of a series of encrypted emails exchanged between Camilla and her personal financial advisor, Lord Edward Hawthorne. These messages, unearthed through digital forensics, outlined detailed plans for financial maneuvers involving royal charities. The language was cryptic. References to special allocations, global outreach initiatives, and emergency relief funds were scattered throughout the correspondence. But with the aid of financial analysts, investigators were able to decode the terminology. Special allocations referred to direct payments from royal charity accounts to offshore trusts. Global outreach initiatives was a euphemism for large-scale money laundering operations designed to mask the origin of funds before they were reinvested. Emergency relief funds were payouts made to members of the royal staff involved in maintaining the network of financial secrecy. What truly shocked investigators was the extent of Camilla's apparent involvement. The emails were not merely casual observations or vague endorsements. They were directives. In one particularly damning exchange, dated 4 years prior, Camilla wrote, "Ensure the Pathways Fund is relocated before year-end. We cannot risk another audit. Have Edward move it through the Luxembourg Channel." The Luxembourg Channel, as investigators soon learned, was a direct reference to a series of accounts registered under Windsor Holdings Limited, managed by Hawthorne himself. The money was shifted just weeks before the Royal Children's Fund underwent its annual audit, a move that had effectively erased any trace of the misappropriated funds. But the connections didn't stop there. Investigators began scrutinizing Camilla's public engagements, comparing them to financial records and transaction logs. A pattern emerged each time she announced a new charitable initiative. Massive transfers were made to offshore accounts within days. These initiatives, often involving grand ceremonies and televised appearances, served as perfect cover for moving large sums of money without drawing suspicion. One of the most egregious examples involved the Global Unity Housing Project, a supposed initiative to build sustainable housing for displaced families in Haiti. At the launch event, Camilla had spoken passionately about the need for shelter and stability, standing before an audience of international dignitaries and community leaders. Cameras flashed, news outlets praised her humanitarian spirit, and donations poured in, nearly £15 million in just under 3 months. Yet, when investigators visited Haiti, they found barren land where the homes were meant to be. Local government officials expressed confusion, claiming they had never been contacted by any royal representatives, nor had they seen a single pound of the pledged money. Meanwhile, financial records showed that the entirety of the donations had been funneled through Windsor Holdings Limited to a series of untraceable accounts in Bermuda. The walls of deception were crumbling, and as they did, the web of royal complicity expanded. Investigators uncovered memos indicating that members of the royal staff were actively instructed to overlook financial discrepancies. One email thread between Lady Margaret Winthrop and a senior accountant named David Langley discussed the movement of nearly £3 million, disguised as administrative costs for a project that never existed. When Langley raised concerns, Lady Winthrop responded curtly, "This matter is beyond your pay grade. Focus on your tasks, and leave the rest to those who understand the bigger picture." The bigger picture, as it turned out, was a massive money laundering operation designed to enrich not just Camilla, but her closest allies within the palace. Names began to emerge from the shadows, minor royals and distant relatives who had long lived in luxury without clear sources of income. Bank transfers linked them to Windsor Holdings Limited, with payments disguised as royal allowances and estate maintenance. The deeper the investigation went, the more it became apparent that the corruption was systemic. It wasn't just a few rogue advisors manipulating accounts, it was an entrenched network of privilege and greed. Financial records showed that nearly a third of the Royal Children's Fund's annual donations were redirected before they ever reached charitable programs. Pathways for Hope, which claimed to provide educational opportunities for women in rural India, was little more than a front for international investments in luxury real estate. The public outcry grew louder with each revelation. Protests intensified outside Buckingham Palace, with demonstrators demanding accountability and justice. Signs reading, "Not above the law," and "Return what's stolen" filled the gates, their voices echoing through the historic streets of London. In Parliament, debates raged over the monarchy's role in public trust. Opposition leaders called for a full independent audit of all royal charitable organizations, while government officials scrambled to distance themselves from the scandal. It was a public relations nightmare, one that threatened not just Camilla's reputation, but the stability of the entire monarchy. Questions began to arise that no one seemed willing to answer. How long had this been going on? Who else knew? And most pressing of all, what would happen next? The Crown Prosecution Service now faced mounting pressure to act, not just to indict those involved, but to send a message that no one, not even royalty, was above the law. A special task force was assembled, comprised of forensic accountants, legal experts, and international banking regulators. Their mission was clear: trace the money, identify every player, and bring them to justice. Subpoenas were issued for financial records, encrypted communications, and private correspondences. Windsor Holdings Limited, once a name whispered only in the halls of power, became the focal point of the largest financial investigation in the monarchy's history. Meanwhile, Queen Camilla maintained her silence. Her public appearances grew sparse, her presence nearly invisible behind the iron gates of Buckingham Palace. Rumors swirled of frantic meetings between her legal team and palace officials, of confidential discussions with international lawyers specializing in financial crimes. It was clear to the world that the scandal was far from over. The royal connection had been exposed, its tendrils stretching into every corner of Buckingham Palace's charitable endeavors. For many, it wasn't just a revelation of greed. It was a betrayal of trust that would take generations to repair. As investigators prepared their next move, one thing was certain: the reckoning had only just begun. The monarchy, shielded by tradition and reverence for centuries, now faced its greatest test. And with each new discovery, the walls that had once protected it grew thinner, more transparent, and far more fragile. The palace had been silent for weeks. Statements from the royal press office were scarce and vague, offering little more than promises of full cooperation with the ongoing investigation. Queen Camilla had not been seen in public since the scandal broke. Her appearances were replaced with hastily arranged photo ops featuring other members of the royal family. But the silence was shattered one gray London morning when a man stepped forward, a man who had been part of the machinery that kept Camilla's financial empire running smoothly. His name was Jonathan Fraser, and his testimony would shake the monarchy to its core. Fraser had served as a senior financial analyst for Windsor Holdings Limited, the offshore trust at the heart of the embezzlement scandal. For nearly a decade, he had managed asset allocations, overseen international transfers, and coordinated with financial institutions across Europe and the Caribbean. His name was whispered in financial circles as one of the sharpest minds in offshore investment. What no one knew was that Fraser had been quietly collecting evidence, emails, financial records, and internal memos that chronicled the massive siphoning of funds from royal charities. His decision to go public wasn't made lightly. For months, Fraser had wrestled with the implications of his knowledge. He understood the weight of his position, the doors it opened, and the secrets it guarded. But the more he learned, the heavier that burden became. It wasn't just about money. It was about betrayal, manipulation, and the systematic exploitation of charitable causes meant to serve the most vulnerable. On the morning of his revelation, Fraser held a press conference at a modest office space in London, far from the grandeur of Buckingham Palace or the financial district. He stood behind a plain wooden podium, dressed in a simple gray suit, flanked by two representatives from a prominent whistleblower protection organization. Cameras flashed, journalists jostled for position, and the air buzzed with anticipation. Fraser began by recounting his role within Windsor Holdings Limited. His voice was steady, measured, as he described the flow of money through offshore accounts, the systematic laundering of donations, and the network of shell companies used to obscure the trails. He spoke of projects that never existed, of orphanages that were mere illusions, of humanitarian missions that were nothing more than lines on a spreadsheet. The room fell silent as he detailed the methods of concealment. There were layers upon layers, Fraser explained. Funds were moved through multiple accounts across different jurisdictions: Switzerland, Luxembourg, the Cayman Islands. Each transfer designed to muddy the waters, to make it nearly impossible for auditors to trace. A reporter called out from the back, her voice sharp and direct. Did Queen Camilla know? Fraser paused, his eyes scanning the room before he replied. Not only did she know, she authorized it. Gasps rippled through the audience, microphones tilted forward, and pens scribbled furiously. Fraser continued, unflinching. He described encrypted communications sent directly from Camilla's private office, approving transfers and authorizing the creation of shell foundations. He mentioned Lady Margaret Winthrop by name, explaining how she handled the logistics, ensuring that everything appeared above board during routine audits. Fraser produced documents, stacks of them, neatly organized and tabbed for clarity. They were distributed among the press, and almost immediately, headlines began to flash across news tickers. Whistleblower implicates Queen Camilla in multi-million-pound scandal, and insider confirms royal complicity in charity fraud. But Fraser wasn't done. He pulled out a flash drive from his jacket pocket and held it up for the cameras to capture. This, he said, contains encrypted emails, transaction logs, and financial statements dating back over 15 years. It's all there, the proof of where the money went, how it was laundered, and who benefited. The room exploded with noise. Journalists shouted over one another, questions piling up faster than Fraser could answer. But his message had already been delivered. The facade had cracked, and now the world could see the rot festering beneath. The release of Fraser's documents ignited a firestorm of controversy. Within hours, digital copies of the files were leaked to media outlets, analyzed by financial experts, and dissected by investigative journalists. There were names, dozens of them, linked to transactions and payouts. Not just minor royals and palace staff, but influential figures in politics and business who had been recipients of what were labeled as charitable grants. One name stood out among the rest: Lord Edward Hawthorne, Camilla's personal financial advisor. Hawthorne had been implicated before, but Fraser's documents painted a far darker picture. Not only had Hawthorne orchestrated the financial machinations of Windsor Holdings Limited, but he had also used his influence to pressure smaller charities into cooperative agreements. These agreements forced smaller foundations to funnel portions of their donations into offshore trusts in exchange for royal endorsements. Fraser's testimony also revealed the existence of the list, a confidential roster of individuals who had received payments disguised as consulting fees or developmental grants. Many were influential in the realms of finance, government, and international trade. Fraser alleged that these individuals had been paid to turn a blind eye to discrepancies, to smooth out regulatory hurdles, and to ensure that audits never dug too deep. The revelation of the list sparked panic among the political elite. Calls for resignations echoed through Parliament, and multiple members of the House of Lords were publicly accused of complicity. The Prime Minister issued a statement, condemning the actions revealed in Fraser's documents and promising a full investigation. It wasn't enough to stem the tide of public outrage. Protests erupted across London, with thousands gathering outside Buckingham Palace and Parliament Square. The banners were bold and unyielding. Justice for the people, no more royal lies, and Camilla must pay. The chants grew louder with each passing day, echoing through the historic streets of London like a drumbeat of rebellion. Meanwhile, Queen Camilla remained silent. Palace spokespeople issued carefully worded statements denying the allegations, claiming that Fraser's testimony was misguided and unfounded. But the public had seen the documents. They had read the emails, examined the transaction logs, and watched as Fraser, with steady resolve, laid out the mechanisms of royal corruption. Fraser, now under the protection of whistleblower laws and guarded by private security, became a symbol of defiance against institutional greed. His bravery inspired others to come forward: former palace aides, charity organizers, and financial analysts who had been silenced or coerced into complicity. Their testimonies added layers to the growing mountain of evidence, each revelation chipping away at the illusion of royal purity. In the days that followed, Buckingham Palace's gates were no longer a symbol of regal splendor but of secrecy and betrayal. The people wanted answers, and they wanted justice. And with Fraser's testimony, the path to that justice had been laid bare for all to see. The whistle had been blown. Now, the world waited for the consequences. The revelations brought forth by Jonathan Fraser sent shockwaves through every level of British society. The image of Queen Camilla, once perceived as a dignified and benevolent figure, had been shattered. Now, she was viewed not as a compassionate royal, but as a manipulative architect of one of the largest financial scandals to ever hit the monarchy. The morning after Fraser's explosive press conference, legal experts flooded news programs, dissecting the implications of his testimony and the documents he presented. The Crown Prosecution Service, CPS, released a statement confirming that they were actively reviewing the evidence and would be pursuing charges if sufficient grounds were established. The mention of criminal charges against a reigning queen consort was unprecedented, leaving legal scholars scrambling to interpret constitutional implications. In the House of Commons, debates grew heated. Opposition MPs demanded a full public inquiry, calling the scandal a betrayal of public trust that warranted nothing less than complete transparency. Some even questioned the viability of the monarchy itself, suggesting that such corruption indicated a deeper problem within the institution. The Prime Minister, caught between public anger and royal protocol, announced the formation of a special commission to investigate the misuse of charity funds linked to the royal family. Public reaction was swift and fierce. Protesters gathered en masse outside Buckingham Palace, their numbers swelling as more citizens joined in to express their outrage. They held signs demanding justice, chanting slogans like "No royal immunity" and "Camilla must stand trial." Social media became a breeding ground for debate, with hashtags like #RoyalFraud and #JusticeForCharities trending worldwide. Meanwhile, legal analysts pointed out the complexity of prosecuting a member of the royal family. Historically, the crown had been seen as immune from prosecution, rooted in the ancient principle that the monarch could do no wrong. However, as Camilla was not the sovereign herself, this immunity did not necessarily extend to her. Furthermore, her direct involvement in criminal activities, as alleged by Fraser, meant that she could not simply hide behind the protective veil of royalty. The Crown Prosecution Service faced mounting pressure to act. Public confidence in the justice system was at stake. If Camilla were seen to escape prosecution due to her status, it would set a dangerous precedent. Public trust in the monarchy, already on shaky ground, could be irreparably damaged. A task force was established within the CPS, composed of some of the nation's most experienced prosecutors and financial crime experts. Their mandate was clear: examine every piece of evidence with the same rigor as any other high-profile fraud case. No special treatment, no royal favors. This move was meant to signal to the public that justice would be impartial and unyielding. Camilla's legal team, meanwhile, began crafting their defense. Led by Sir Henry Calder, a barrister renowned for defending high-profile clients, the strategy was to discredit Fraser's testimony and cast doubt on the authenticity of the documents.